If I say American versus, what do you think of? Lots of answers are correct to this question, but Russia is a common response. Anyone that is familiar with Western media can name at least 3 movies where the antagonists were communists, Russian big fat vodka bat killing men, KGB agents, and so forth. This America versus Russia idea originated during the Cold War. Everyone was hell-bent on who was better than the other, which reflected in the movies that were shot in America at the time. In one sense, movies could be characterized as America's storytellers. Speaking of, what movies were shot at the time? What is the American film genre or style that everyone knows from the 1940s? A likely answer is film noir. Its aesthetic was so memorable that even today, anyone can recognize it. In the short introduction to film noir, it says that film noir is for us, meaning for Western and American audiences of the 1950s. Although the style quickly went international, filmmakers still use noir for nostalgia, drama, and aesthetic in modern work. And that's completely called for. Just look at these stills, they're gorgeous. But these stills come from a Russian show set in the Soviet Union. It's a 2020 historical drama called Dyatlov Pass, or Dead Mountain. It is dedicated to 9 students that mysteriously died on a ski expedition in 1959, and the show follows a fictional investigation of their death. The tent of the students was found ripped from the inside, clothes and food left, and the bodies underdressed and frozen far away from where they slept. This is an infamous unsolved case and was a great tragedy of the Soviet Union. Every Russian person knows it. But when we think of film noir, we tend to picture uniquely American features. So why use it to tell a Soviet story? First, let's establish what film noir is so we can compare it to the odd episodes or the noir episodes of Dead Mountain. This is easier said than done. Film noir is notoriously hard to define, and critics still debate if it's a genre or a style. Paul Schrader's notes on film noir is part of the latter. He argues that noir is not a genre and is defined by tone, hence is a style. He lists 7 recurring techniques of noir as a style. Schrader also lists loss, nostalgia, lack of clear priorities, and insecurities as noir themes, as well as the mood of an irretrievable past, a predetermined fate, and an all-enveloping hopelessness. However, a lot of people disagree with him, saying that noir is a genre. A summary of this argument can be found in Film Noir, The Genre That Never Sleeps by James Parker. In it, he argues that film noir is a genre because of its recurring conventions. He cites Foster Hirsch's definition: a genre is determined by conventions of narrative structure, characterization, theme, and visual design. Parker lists 10 conventions of noir as a genre. For our purposes, it doesn't really matter if noir is a genre or a style, so let's just group all the common characteristics together so we can compare Dead Mountain to them. So let's start with a stylistic approach to noir. Scenes lit at night, oblique and vertical lines, actors and setting getting equal emphasis, compositional tension, attachment to water or Mother Nature. Not only rain and snow, but the characters also address Mother Nature as a living being.
Как думаешь, природа, она живая?
Narration. The detective narrates his investigation and the students narrate their diaries. Flashbacks. Almost every episode features a World War II flashback. And finally, a mood of an irretrievable past, a predetermined fate, and an all-enveloping hopelessness could be used as a theme summary of the show.
Ростик, он уже палатку откопал, он уже печку стопил, он уже все сделал. Вставай! Вставай, ну вставай!
Now, let's compare the show to Parker's 10 film noir conventions. The spider web of fate. One of the show's main theme is fate, and the characters always fall to accidental occurrences. The detective. The femme fatale and the good girl. Dead Mountain only features one female character in the noir section, Kata. She seems like the good girl of the story as she represents family and purity. However, she does take on some elements of the femme fatale, and she's quite cunning and helps Alex solve the case. Unconventional story structure. Voiceover narration. Plot conventions. The students die because of their moral ambitions, and Oleg has to reach his breaking point to solve the case. Lighting. The Dark City. Instead of the city becoming a character, the native spirit, Surly Night, and the concept of Mother Nature becomes it. And finally, themes.
Они не собирались уходить из палатки? Поужинали и просто хотели спать? Но кто-то или что-то...
It is no surprise that the directors of the show said that they chose the classic neo-noir look. The term neo-noir is quite debated as well, but the overall consensus is that it is a reimagined noir with different themes. In the Film Inquiry, there is a list of neo-noir characteristics, and they look like either an involvement or a retelling of the noir ones. Cynical, deeply flawed protagonists. The main protagonist of Dead Mountain is a war criminal that works for the KGB as a detective. Interplay of light and dark.
Что? Это вещь, которая, собственно, цена. Не то, что показано плохое, а то, что показано, что бывает разное, что война не может быть черно-белой, что ничего в мире не может быть черно-белым, а последним, что может быть черно-белым, это война.
And finally, femme fatale. In this definition, the modern femme fatale is a far more sympathetic and empowered, which is more in line with the character of Katya as discussed prior. Needless to say, the show is hitting every criteria of noir. The film noir aesthetic is not a new concept in modern media. Critical writing about film noir has tended to suggest that it's distinctly American, but countries around the world have made such films and will continue making them. The peculiar thing here is that the story told is distinctly Soviet, and telling it through a film noir is an interesting decision since it's distinctly American. The show doesn't just take elements of noir for the aesthetic, it deliberately mimics the noir films, separating it from a simple use of aesthetic. If you watch the show, you know that only half of it is a noir. The even episodes were shot by a completely different crew in a digital 4x3 format and has a vintage black and white look to it. It follows the 9 students on their expedition from the start and ends in their demise. This story structure deserves an analysis of its own, but let's look at this part separately. The first thing that stands out is the realistic approach. Real pictures were recreated. Real diary entries were used for narration, and props paralleled the students' real possessions, like the newspaper made by the kids. It comes to no surprise that the writer had access to the KGB files, and the creators put a lot of effort into making the section feel as authentic as possible. This is further emphasized by the director's realistic style, as he is based in documentary filmmaking. The producers stated multiple times that they wanted to humanize these kids, something that they felt was missing because they were remembered only for their death. In the film Dead Mountain, film about the film, the producer-director Yevgeny Nikishev explained that they wanted to convey the main emotion that they had felt while reading these diaries. They thought that in order to convey this emotionally and visually, it was necessary to stylize the show to look like the movies of the children's time. Movies that everyone, one way or another, has in their minds, at least every Russian person does. And that is the most important thing here. On top of this realism, this section is stylized to look like Soviet movies from the 60s. If you, like me, grew up watching those movies, the callbacks are evident. There are simple allusions like the design of the titles, costuming, line delivery, and even the music style. Furthermore, the visuals are very similar as well, from the silhouette shots from the undelivered letters to the composition and lighting from the very known war film Dyatlov. Furthermore, the director stated that they were casting actors to not only resemble the students, but to also portray the common character archetypes of the 60s Soviet cinema. The character of Dubinina is almost cheesy, but so familiar at the same time, like in the aforementioned movie Devchata. The character of Zina is also recognizable, as she channels more of the cool, resourceful girl, like in the iconic film Kavkazskaya Plenitsa. These visual reminders create a strong feeling of nostalgia in any Russian viewer. A nostalgia for the romantic era of the 60s. As Stalin's regime came to an end, the first generation free of World War II trauma filled the air with hope for a better future. Filmmakers started spreading that excitement by telling new stories of the simple man that finds his place in the world. In the book The Red Screen, Anna Lawton describes this era's creative landscape as an electrifying atmosphere, where many directors had their professional initiation. Filmmakers were eager to experiment with new themes and new forms as a reaction to the stagnation of the previous decade. She characterizes the 1960s by creative ferment, and many Russian people say that the best Soviet films came out of this era. Vysotsky's song about friendship and mountain expeditions defined the times, and going on these expeditions were a mark of freedom for students.
Если друг оказался вдруг, и не друг, и не враг, а так, если сразу не разберешь, плох он или хорош, Парня в горы тяни, рискни, не бросай одного.
People who grew up in the Soviet Union romanticize the 60s because they are magical and beautiful to them. They represent a wonderful future that is unfulfilled, almost like an unfulfilled promise. So the show alternates between two sections that both call for nostalgia for different cultural times. But how are they connected? Well, of course they're connected through story, but the main connector is theme. The show has three main themes going through it, organically connecting the two pieces by drawing topics associated with the aesthetics they portray and applying them to the whole story. First, we have the disconnects between the World War II veterans and the new generation. This is an obvious choice, since there is a whole section of noir films that deals with soldiers returning from war. It is mainly the characters of Oleg, Katya, and Sasha that demonstrate this theme, as all of them struggle with PTSD. Of course, Oleg's and Katya's theme exploration is confined to the noir section, mainly contrasted with the naivety of her son.
Олег Дмитриевич, а много немцев убили?
Коль,
Ничего. Какой ты парень, боевой.
However, Sasha extends this theme to the Soviet section, as his character clashes with the naivety of the students.
Знаете, у некоторых людей на войне как будто бы предчувствие есть. Они уже перед боем знают, что не вернутся. Прощаются, письма пишут домой.
Но мы сейчас не на войне. И ничего с ним не случится.
Another great example is when Katya tells Oleg about how she felt when her husband died, comparing her trauma to being frozen, just like the kids' bodies.
я хотела, чтобы этот холод проник в меня. И всю эту боль заморозил.
Second, we have the theme of fate, also drawn from noirs. The show casts doubts in the viewer's understanding of reality through editing and dialogue. For example, the natives claim that the spirit of Sorninai made their child sick, and when he screams out in pain, it cuts to the eyes breaking and killing the students. The child lives. This editing does not prove that the events are actually connected, but makes the viewer ponder if it does. The theme is also explored through props, as Sasha's death-avoiding ring seems to protect him.
Это кольцо. Только оно может не дать тебе умереть.
Later, he ends up giving it to a runaway prisoner, letting go of his war trauma. Of course, this was right before he died. Again, it's very subtle, but makes the viewer ponder if the ring is actually magical. The show goes through all the supernatural theories of the student's death, but ends up backing up the most likely and realistic version of the events. And that version is the most terrifying one, because we know that that's what probably happened with the students, and that can totally happen to us. This quote stood out to me on the first watch, and it's the best summary of this theme.
Знаю, что это было. Может, судьба. Но ведь не Бог же.
Third, and most important, we have the theme of friendship.
После трудного дня спят товарищи. Почему среди них нет тебя?
This is a theme that is taken directly from 60s Soviet culture and cinema. Obviously, this theme is present in the Soviet section, as the kids die because they couldn't leave their wounded behind.
Оставьте меня здесь, не тратьте время! Нет, ты идешь с нами без обсуждений!
However, Oleg understood that only after realizing why his friend sacrificed himself for his life.
Он мог убежать, понимаешь?
Он не мог. Иначе это был бы не он.
In the show's version of the events, the kids died for their friends, and the writer invented the character of Oleg to emphasize that theme.
Они ошиблись. Но только потому, что спешили спасти своих друзей.
After looking closer at the show's themes and story, it becomes clear why the creators chose those two styles. The show can be read as a grief for the good time of the 60s. these young, hopeful, and seemingly undefeatable students set out on this amazing trip, and then get destroyed by something bigger than them and by their own beliefs. They represent the long-gone spirit of the 60s and then perish, and the detective looks back on that event through a pessimistic, gloomy, and terrifying lens of film noir. Furthermore, in Dead Mountain, film about the film, the actors point out that kids of those times were pure, as if they were cleansed a whole generation, and they also point out that these expeditions helped escape the social construction of the Soviet Union. So the story could even be considered set outside of USSR. This makes the student's death even more poignant, as it cannot be seen as a death of Soviet ideals, but also as the death of good people. However, I think this show can be read in another way. Neo-noirs are not a new thing in Russia, but I think the difference here is the possibility of the show reaching the Western audience through streaming platforms. The English trailers do not mention the 3 themes that we talked about earlier. It just talks about the mystery real crime detective. It's technically a Russian show presenting itself as an Americanized outlook on a Soviet story, luring you in by promising an American-style blockbuster, then hitting you with the reality of PTSD, discussion of fate, and a reflection on friendship. It's as if the show is reaching out a hand to the Western audience saying, hey look, we will tell our story using your style, but present the reality of our stories through ours. I read it as an attempt to making peace with the American versus Russian tendency, representing something very real and addressing a transnational audience. This is a show about humans, not Russians, Germans, Americans. It's about how people handle trauma and grief, about how humans tend to refer to spirituality to explain something inexplicably awful, and about a tragic death of people that believed into something beautiful.
Тысячи, миллионы людей. Не военных, которые так же, как мы, не хотели воевать. Они также плакали, у них также погибали близкие. А крики, плач, слезы. Они все без перевода, Коля. Они на всех языках одинаково.